Welcome to this week's episode of It's All Fun and Games, the official Gamezo podcast. I am Dan, the head writer at Gamezo. This week, joined by Ross, as always, and a special third guest. But before we introduce the special third guest, some housekeeping. One, like, subscribe, 5-star rate it. You know, we do it at the beginning, the end, every week. Just go, like, subscribe, download, rate the podcast. Okay. The second thing, this podcast is going to be a little bit different. Traditionally, if you listen to us or watch us, we do, hey, Ross, what have you been playing? Oh, blah, blah, blah. And then we go, hey, some stuff happened this week in news. And then we go, some topic that Ross and I have very strong opinions on, followed by esports stuff. This week, we are not going to do that because we are going to be
Thank God.
interviewing a genuine, real life indie game developer. So now, with that out of the way, Leith, do you want to do your intro?
Okay. Hi, I'm Leith. I'm one of the two developers that work on Starport Delta, which is a space station building game that came out a month ago.
Awesome.
Um, yeah.
We'll get.
You have to think about that for a second.
Yeah. It's
You're like, wait,
it's like, wait, how long has it been? Yeah. It's funny. There's so much that is sort of in the lead up to. Oh my God, we've got how many days it is until you launch,
plus
and
you're
then
still working on it, so
yeah, we're keeping on going. But it's so funny. Like the focus is always launch week. You know. Everyone talks about that first week because so many of the statistics are always based around how did you do in that first week and what did you do in that first week. So after that, it's like, oh wait, no, how long has it been?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you a lot about like that whole build up to launch week and everything. But before we tackle that, Starport Delta, I reviewed it. This is my plug. Go to the Gamezo website. You can read the review. I rated it highly. We'll get into why that might be counter to what some people have been saying. But I think that between the work that the team's done, the core gameplay, the mechanics, the graphics, everything, I rated it well. So that's my opinion as someone who
Thank you for
enjoys the
that, by
game.
the way.
Yeah, no problem. The other thing is we have the chat going. We're not going to let the chat ask you whatever they want. Okay. Um, we have
There'll be a filtered chat questions. Yeah.
yeah. So we'll leave that there. But I do want to mention it's not an Australian accent. Okay. It's a New Zealand accent. We already
Yes.
got one comment. This episode will do well due to the Australian accent. No, it's not. It
this is
is
why the chat's always emoji only.
yeah. But we have Paul, the owner of Gamezo, today moderating. So
Yeah.
we trust him,
Yeah. No,
I guess.
Australia and New Zealand are in fact different places. Yes.
Yeah, it was funny. I was listening to, and we had a 20-minute conversation about how awesome New Zealand is. But I was listening to a podcast like a year ago, and this dude went and he visited Australia, and then he hopped over to New Zealand to do some vacationing, and he was surprised that like you guys wouldn't take the money. And I was like, well, they're two different countries. Like, why are you surprised? You know? So
I mean, it's probably not as unheard of. I mean, you look at Europe, and who most of them take the euro, so I guess it's not completely out of the realms, but yes, they are different countries with different currency.
Spoiled
Yeah,
Europeans.
yeah, of
yeah.
course. So up front, give us, you mentioned, okay, you worked on Starport Delta. It's a two-person team. We're going to dig more into the dynamics of that as we go. But
Sure.
give the people the rundown. What is Starport Delta? What kind of game is it? Where can they play it?
So Starport Delta's a space station building game. It's kind of we kind of call it a light strategy. There's only two of us, so as much as we wanted to, we can't exactly go and build a 4X or something that has masses and masses of depth like a city skylines or what have you. But yeah, it's got a campaign and sandbox modes for kind of free play and that sort of stuff. And there's a surprising amount of depth to it in the sense of how you design and build things your own way can make a big difference. We've got a few players that have been playing it for hundreds of hours already, and that kind of blows my mind a little bit. But yeah, it's available on Steam. It's also up on Humble Store and Green Man Gaming. Although at the end of the day, it's a Steam key. You can buy it from us direct as well, for that matter. But it's still a Steam key. Yeah, it's kind of hard. One of the things you're talking about, what is it? One thing that we've had a lot is what seems to be kind of like genre confusion,
Mhm.
and there's fundamentally it's kind of a city builder game, but it's got elements of strategy or puzzle or tower defense and these sorts of things to it, and I think that confuses a lot of people. And we've had a lot of players coming in thinking it's a 4x and then going, why is this not a 4x? And the reason for that is because it's just two of us and we couldn't build it without it taking 10 years.
Of course.
So, um, it's been amazingly kind of complimentary and scary having people say, "Wow, this has better graphics than Stellaris," and we're like, "Wait, hang on, you're using Stellaris as your benchmark here? Like, there's something wrong with this picture." That's an amazing game, but it also has hundreds of people and millions of dollars behind it, and is a much bigger thing than what we'd set out to achieve. So it has been very interesting. Just the genre thing in particular has we were like, oh well, it's a city builder, but at the same time it's kind of not. Like a lot of people that play a lot of city builders, your City Skylines or your Sim City or what have you, there's a lot more really oddly specific depth in terms of transportation and side quests effectively that happen in those sorts of games. And that hasn't when they kind of realize, oh, that's not what this is, they get a bit annoyed.
Yeah, I can see that, right? And not like genres seem to be so like very it's like people they'll see a genre and they'll say like, okay, that's an FPS, and then if you
Yeah,
are missing one core mechanic or you add some new mechanic that they're not used to, it kind of can like freak them out a little bit. um,
yeah,
but for me, I that's what I liked about Starport Delta is like I've played a ton of City Skylines, and I just like it was nice to have a game where those mechanics were there, but like you said, there were also some tower defense and just general strategy elements to it that weren't just like, oh, my sewer lines are backed up. And like I don't need to be managing a city budget and that type of stuff. Sometimes I just want to build a sprawling cool thing and deal
yeah.
with other stuff. Um, Now I don't know if you remember this, but I remember it, vividly. You probably met with way more people at PAX than I did. I met with a lot of people, but you guys had a booth, and I
I
had
I don't know if I'd bet on that.
I had appointments. But right at the end of the interview, I was like, okay, so what do you have? Like a small team of 10, right? And you already mentioned this. You said no, it's two, and I was just like, what the? We try not to swear here. F. I was like, like this game has a number of mechanics that I would not expect from a team of two. So how long did you guys work on it?
2 years. Yeah,
Okay.
it was almost 2 years when we launched, and most of that has been part time. We both have full time gigs doing other stuff, and this has been a project we've been self funding and just trying to get off the ground. Um, and yeah, it was really weird. I think the first time we did PAX last year, and we had people asking us about the team, and we're like, no, these two people at the booth, we are the team. And one, they were surprised about the size of the team, but also they were surprised that it was actually us at the booth, which was really funny. It was like, oh no, well, I guess it kind of makes sense in the sense if you go to Nintendo or what have you, it's PR people at the
Hmm.
booth. It's not Nintendo developers at the booth. Um, so that the people that you're talking to are giving you a pitch about you know buying something or here's a swag or what have you, whereas you go to any of the indie section, I think, and chances are the people behind the desk are the people that made the game, and I think that makes it a much different conversation. But yeah, there was a lot of surprise about, oh yeah, it's us, small team of 10. It's like, no, small team when you're in New Zealand speak is one or two people. So yeah,
Yeah,
it,
makes
it
sense.
has been quite interesting. And as I said, Ian, who does all of the making it pretty factor, has had a lot of compliments about the game. And the the flip side of that, though, has seemed to have been that people don't believe that it's just two people that made it. They look at the graphics that he's done, and it does look great. And they're like, this is clearly made by a team of 10 or 20 or whatever it is. It's like, no, it's that guy right there.
that one person, yeah. And two things you mentioned there that I think like are really true and people don't understand, and this is why Ross always teases me. He's like, "You have the biggest heart for indie developers," and I do. I love indie developers, but it's for many reasons, and one of them is what you mentioned. It's when you go and you talk to somebody about the game. I went to who was it, Tiny Build, right?
Mhm.
They're the ones with all the orange and stuff.
Yeah.
They were like, "Here's all of our indie games," and it was like the PR guy, and he was great, and the games were cool. And then they brought me into a booth, and they were like, "Would you like a free massage? Here's a bunch of swag." And I was like, "No, I want to talk more about the games, but I go to you, I go to some of the other, smaller indie booths, and it's the
Yeah.
developer or it's someone who is directly connected to the game and not a producer or a PR person or something like that. And you learn a lot more about the games because, you're talking to the people who make the games, which is important. And then I think the
Sure.
other important thing you mentioned there is I don't know what this is about the gaming community in general, but like everybody feels like every developer, and I blame AAA games for this, but I feel like a lot of gamers think every developer is trying to pull the wool down, Like every developer's lying about something. Oh, the graphics are beautiful. No, it can't be two people. Oh, whatever the case is. So
Yeah.
I think that is what
Yeah.
is.
I think it's interesting because there's no real scale in game development. You're either AAA or you're indie.
Hmm.
And you get the odd studio who kind of tries to build themselves as double A or something. But really from a player standpoint, there's no way to tell, who built it, unless you go look at the credits, or it's a company you already know. And it's been really weird talking to people, or reading comments and discussions and stuff. And when they find out that it's two people that made it, there's this like weird 180 of attitude
Hmm.
where they go, wait, hang on, this is an indie game. Wait, I thought this was somewhere up at that AAA end of the spectrum. And it's weird because I look at that and I understand, and I'm like, okay, well, if I was thinking this was a team made by a team of 200 people, I'd be like, yeah, and where's the rest of it?
Hmm.
Um, but when I look at it and go, no, no, it's a team of two. This is something that it takes a lot more effort to produce. So it has been interesting how much that's impacted people's expectations. I think is probably what it is. When you expect something from Blizzard or EA or whatever, you're not gonna expect to sit down and have a you know 10 hours of gameplay or whatever it is. You're expecting something massive or multiplayer or hundreds of hours of time that you could sink into it. um, so yeah, it's very weird, and I think that uh, you know it's that classic trope of we're developers, not marketing people. So
Hmm.
we have no idea what we're doing about how to sell the game. And I think that in retrospect, one thing that we didn't do very well was explain that it is just the two of us.
Yeah.
Uh, like it's funny. Like I kind of think back and I'm like, okay, there are other indie developers. I look back and it's really obvious. You look at their marketing copy or whatever. It's like, yeah, this is the team of two people or whatever it is as part of their story. And I don't think we told that story very well. Because people came into it thinking we were a lot bigger than we were.
Yeah, and like you said, that's a compliment to you guys, but it's also like it's infuriating. And I took that in my review. I took that into account, and I think people have to do.
Yeah,
You have to do that, right? Like you said, you have to take all of the information together and look at it. And you can't review, for instance, like I always use the example. I did a review of a sim racing cockpit, right? And it's an entry
mhm,
level cockpit, and it's an excellent. It's like if we were looking at only entry level sim racing cockpits, it's a 10 out of 10. But there's
mm,
like a whole market of like things that move and have like full force feedback, and like so you have to rate
sure.
it in that regard. But when you look at an indie game, you can look at the landscape of indie games, and you can look at other games that had similar sized teams and how much they were able to get out of it. And for two people to get that compliment that you're a bigger team, that's great, as long as it's taken into account, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. It is. It's both, as you say. It's a compliment and it's infuriating because I think it says that their expectations are a lot higher than we thought they would be. Um, but also it says that, well, we're doing good enough work with what we're doing that that's the level of comparison. So it is very much a compliment, and we take it as such. But it's also, yeah, I do wish that we had more of that kind of taken into account. But at the end of the day, though, in some respects, it doesn't matter. You know, indie or not, you're still competing in
Mhm.
a landscape with AAA games, and particularly at the moment, you know, there's a lot of really excellent AAA and successful indie titles from a few years ago that have been heavily discounted or given away to help support people through the COVID lockdown stuff. So, you know, there's a lot of really awesome stuff coming out, and that makes it kind of an interesting time to launch a game as well.
Yeah.
Unfortunate for sure. Um, do you feel like since you can't sort of put yourself in the category of game devs with teams of 2 people or single A or indie, like, there's no way for you to kind of really market yourself up against others as that. Do you feel like um how am I going to word this? Do you feel like the price point you may have put yourself at sort of kind of put the expectation like, hey, this is more than a team of 2 people? Not to say anything about obviously like how you value your game or anything like that, but a lot of say quote unquote indie games, I don't know if you know the conversion to American dollars, but usually, 14, 19, that's kind of like the realm where they sit at. So
Mhm.
I noticed a lot of kind of because I did some research in the reviews and stuff like that for the game, and a lot of people were just like, "Oh, at this price point, I expect X, Y, Z and stuff like that." And
Yeah, so prices. I mean, pricing anything, games or not, is kind of a black art, I think, and that's kind of tricky. It's it's one of those things that we talked about with a lot of players throughout development, and you know, it was really interesting last year at PAX, the first time we went. You know, that was one of our questions, you know, because it was earlier in development, and we were like, okay, you know, with the content we've got right now, and this is people who hadn't played any of the campaign content, and they were just playing one of the sandbox modes basically, and they're like, okay, you know, what do you think? What would be the price point? And you know, most of them came back in and said, yeah, it's about the 14.99 or whatever it is US, and we were like, yep, that sounds about right for where we were at in development. And originally we were hoping to get more funding and make it bigger, a bigger game, and that would have pushed the price point up a bit more. But pricing's hard. You know, like when we were talking to people at PAX this year, and saying, you know, okay, this is what we're thinking in terms of the price point, because it was still before launch and we still could have changed it to be whatever. You know, most people that we talked to was like, yeah, you know, that seems about right. And um, I think that there's also a lot of discussion that we've had with other developers where people are like, be very, very careful about the race to the bottom in terms of pricing. You know, indie games have this in spades because they're like, oh, well, I'm making this platformer, and you know, this other platformer sold at, you know, 14.99, so I'm going to make mine 13.99. Everyone will buy it. No, that's not really how pricing works. Um, but there's also a kind of odd thing that happens with that where, you know, if your starting point is $15, and you know, the reality is most people buy stuff when it's the Steam sales, you know, it's the summer sale or the winter sale or whatever. And if you start at 15 and you discount by 40% or whatever it is, you know, plus then you take out Valve's cut and whatever else you're having to pay for, you know, by the time you kind of get to the end of that, you're making like $2. And I've had a lot of developers caution us and say, look, don't undervalue your game because most of the units you shift will be in a sale, and you need to make sure that the value that you're providing actually comes out the other end of that, even with a discount. And I think that there's some really interesting discussions from a few developers who are like, you know, players are really spoiled today, and you look at kind of the equivalent price point that we were paying. I say we because I do remember this, for games, you know, 10, 20 years ago. and say, okay, well, if you added inflation and all the rest of it, what would you be paying for games today? And it's ridiculous. Like it's a really really high price point. And on the one hand, I think it's good. I think that people should be paying less because we don't have physical distribution as a mandatory thing anymore. And there's a lot of indie games where you're not having to pay for 1,000 people making a game. So there's sort of just sheer scale of economics there.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I do think things like the mobile market in particular, where you've got lots of free games that are paid for by advertising or games that are $1, it means that a lot of players don't value games the same way. Like I kind of look at it as how much do you pay to go to the movies, right? I don't know what the average price ticket is in the States, but
Oh God.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like,
all right, okay. So for people to go to actually go to the cinema and don't just Netflix it, what would you pay to go and see a movie?
at least, I mean, minimum, like, not
Just
matinee, like,
just
just a
just
minimum.
just the ticket, just the ticket, not none of the concessions and the rest of it, just
Okay,
the ticket.
like $15 a person is pretty average.
Yeah.
Okay, so you pay $15 for essentially 2 hours of entertainment
Mhm.
on average, right? So I kind of use this as my mental benchmark and say, okay, if I'm quite happy to pay $15 to sit and watch a movie for 2 hours, what does that mean for a game that I'm going to play for at least 10 hours? Like what value am I getting out of that? And that's something which is interactive. It's something where I get to choose and have more influence. So you take that into consideration and you look at some of the games where people have sunk hundreds of hours into them and you're like, man, you are totally getting your money's
Mhm.
worth out of that $60 game or whatever it is, right? And it's been really interesting because this was a big factor for us talking about pricing for us and saying, okay, well, if we've got a campaign, uh, and it's a relatively short campaign, but the difficulty does ramp up and it does go through all the mechanics and teach you how to do things. And then we've got a bunch of different sandbox modes and challenge modes, and you know you can easily sink 10 hours into that
Mhm.
to have like a reasonable crack at just trying things out, like let alone delving into really trying to build stuff. Like even just trying everything out, you could easily spend 10 hours
Hmm.
easily. So we do kind of look at that and go, okay, well, you use your movie benchmark and say, well, this is about the value you're getting in terms of your time. And obviously, the market has a different opinion about games should cost this much or that much. And there's we've had a couple of reviews definitely where they've said this doesn't feel like the right price point, and we do definitely take that into consideration and be like, yeah, uh, you might be right. Um, and I think that what that'll mean is when it comes around to the summer sale or the winter sale, and it's 40% off or 50% off or whatever percentage it is that we decide to throw at Steam for this, people will probably be happier with it. They'll look at it and say, okay, it's a $25 game, and I'm getting it for less than $20. This feels good.
Mhm.
This feels like a good deal or a good price point or what have you. Um, so it's hard. I think pricing anything is hard, and particularly games is a weird landscape for pricing.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but
Like Dan and I both think that 60 for AAA games is way too low
Mhm.
in the current landscape of things.
absolutely, absolutely. Like some of those games, man. Like I look at them and it's like this is 60 is a bargain. Like you're kidding me. Like it should be at least 100.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was
20.
actually I was gonna say that easy is I have that opinion of all kinds of stuff. I think we talked on the last podcast about like Final Fantasy VII remake, and I was like, if you
Yeah.
gave me like this for $120, happy, like I'm good, And I think indie games, like you said, they undervalue themselves a lot. They race to the bottom. You get these like
Yeah,
$10 experiences, and you're like, what are you doing, guy? You're losing a bunch of money. But people are spoiled, like you said, and they're trained for like 60, 15,
yeah.
a dollar, like depending on where it sits.
Indie's really hard in that respect because they're not business people by and large. Like it's that trope of the indie developer that goes and makes a game and then goes, right, I've made a game, how do I sell it?
Hmm.
And part of that is pricing, and it's this. I don't think any of them are really wedded to the, well, I can't afford rent lifestyle. It's a nobody really likes that. But there's a weird sort of expectation, I think, that you're never going to make any money as an indie developer. Um, then that gets reflected in this idea that, well, it's an indie game, therefore I should only pay $10.
Hmm.
And there's been some amazing indie games that I've played that I look at and I'm just like, this should be twice the price that it is, and I don't understand it. And some of it they're probably just relying on scale. When you're a $10 game or what have you, you're at that tipping point where people are okay with paying that. So there's a degree of volume, I think, that goes through that, and you're not going to get um, maybe as many refunds or as many people kind of having, as you say, kind of higher expectations because they look at it and say, well, even if it was made by a team of 20 people, if they're only putting a $10 price tag on it, they don't have their own expectations about what kind of value or content they're putting into it. And it's weird because they look at it and they're like, yeah, a team of 20 people is so tiny. Uh,
You would
like,
die. You would die to 10x your team.
yeah, it's just like that text is the team. I was just like, yeah, that's not small when you're on the other side of that equation. So
Yeah,
So
for
with
sure.
your team size with that in mind, if I could give you any size team, any funding you wanted, can you give me like the top 3 things you would love to add to your game that you just can't in your current situation? Or even one, that's fine.
for this game in particular, probably the biggest thing that I think we talked about that we really wanted to do was the campaign. Like last year we spent a lot of time talking to publishers and trying to you know get funding, and part of that was going to be expanding the team and what would we put in and that sort of stuff. So we've had a lot of discussions around this, and the biggest one I think was the campaign. We really wanted to make it longer and make sure that all of the mechanic stuff was in the tutorials slightly differently than how we have it now. But it was, yeah, I think that it's depth. Like when there's only two of us, we're like, okay, it's a light strategy. It's something that realistically, if you're a casual player, you can pick it up and play it. And we've had people who get into Zen mode and build these ridiculously large stations, or they'll just sit and play it for a few hours, and it's easy enough to get into without needing to learn like hundreds of little mechanics and things. And as you say, your sewage backed up somewhere. There are no roads in space to have to deal with. So it's a different kind of thing. But what we really wanted to do was just add the depth. That when there's only two of you, you can't make the galactic domination 4x of Stellaris or what have you. But we really wanted to make something in that direction that was still kind of accessible by more players. And I think what we really wanted to do is just have more. It's just more of what we're doing right now, and that's what I think funding or more people or what have you would have done for us. I mean, we have enough ideas about this game to fill 2 more games if we wanted to, or one really, really, really big game.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a fascinating process at the start with uh, brainstorming, in that kind of pre-production phase where you're like, okay, this is the idea right now. Now that we've kind of gone past the yes, we're going to do this. Like, what are the actual mechanics? What's the storyline that we want to tell? How do we want to do this? And there's always too much. Like, ideas are never a problem.
Yeah.
And I think most indie developers are like this. Like you talk to them like, okay, what's your backlog of ideas? And even for any given game that you make, there's always more stuff that you want to put into it that you don't have time for. So it's a tricky question in the sense of there's always more. And it's really, for us, we look at it and go, okay, well, maybe we'll put this in a sequel or maybe an expansion pack or something, because realistically we couldn't do it with just the two of us. And I think if you had a bigger team, if you had a bigger budget, I do wonder sometimes if you have just the same problem on a bigger scale. It's that, sure, we put in all this stuff, but we've still got these ideas for even bigger things that we would love to do if we had more time or more money or whatever it is. Nobody's going to give you an unlimited budget and unlimited team size. So time, honestly, like even if you scaled up the team and the budget, you still got to release something. You still got to get it out the door. So yeah, I think just more of what we're doing, more upgrades, more recipes for how we build things, more campaign content. Um, that was really, I think, what we were looking at adding in.
I had you started talking about it a little bit, but this fascinates me probably the most about um, not AAA games. I guess it probably follows a similar process, just way more bureaucracy. But can you walk us through like what it's like when you start, the seed is planted in your mind about this game you want to, I'm assuming it's a game you wanted to play, right? Most people don't make a game they don't want to play. Um, what does it look like from that initial, like, man, you know what I'd really like to play? Starport Delta or whatever it was at that point in your head, through like conceptualizing it, through to getting Ian to join, right? Through to like actually deciding to, okay, we're doing this. Like, what does that we're doing this phase look like?
Well, okay, so it's a bit. So Ian and I have been working together outside of games for quite a long time, and we've also been making kind of prototypes and talking about game ideas for almost as long. Um, so we've got other kind of prototypes and things that we've worked on that have not quite got off the ground for various reasons. And part of that discussion, I guess, initially when the last project that we worked on, we kind of got to the point where we were like, actually, this is too big, and this was the big reason why we stopped. And we realized that we hadn't planned out as much as we should have, and we kind of started it with the, hey, let's put together a prototype to get it to this local convention and just see what we can do, and just kind of ran with it. And that was fun, but yeah, we kind of got to the point where we were like, this needs to be a team of 20 people if we're going to actually do this justice and not take another decade and be out of place in the market. So when we stopped and we kind of took a break for a bit, and then we're like, okay, right. As I said, we got like a whole backlog of ideas. What are the things we want to do? So we look at our ideas list and we say, right, what are the things we think are feasible? What can the two of us make? And also part of it is looking at the market and saying, okay, get our prognosticator hat on and say, what do we think is going to be, something the market wants in, the next couple of years. And at the time, there was not as many space games. And we've seen over the last 6 months in particular, we've had quite a few awesome space games come out. And we've had some interestingly, some space base building type games as well, or things that have a city building element to them, even if it's not necessarily a science fiction aesthetic. So I think we were spot on in terms of people want this kind of game, and some of our reviews and things have been like, there are not enough station building games, and there's not enough of this kind of thing in the market, and that's really hard to predict, right? It's really hard to look at the market and say, where's the gap, especially when you've got such a big lead time. It's not like you're churning this out over a weekend. So there's that degree of what are we predicting will be successful, or not necessarily successful, but what do people want? And people talk about the market cycles. Well, there's pirates, and then there's ninjas, and then there's pirates again.
Mm-hmm.
Like it, and that's very true. Like as hilarious as that is, like you can absolutely see waves of these themes that come through in games, and so reading that a little bit and saying, okay, what do we want to make? The core idea it usually starts off for us as like a single sentence. Usually that's that. What's the 10-second pitch or what have you? And for us it was we wanted something that was an accessible sim city in space. Like we wanted something that was yeah, we've played a lot of strategy games and a lot of city builder games. So strategy was a big part of it, and um, we wanted to make something that would do that. And we saw some really cool kind of not necessarily city builder, but sort of strategy stuff that had come out a few years ago, and we were like, this is kind of cool, but not quite what we want. Not quite what we would like to play. So absolutely, there's a degree of you start off trying to build something that you want to play, but I think that it also needs to be tempered a little bit by what do other people want to play. We had a build of the game after a week of development that we took to a local convention here in New Zealand called Armageddon, and we're as part of the New Zealand Game Developers Association booth. There's a bunch of different indie games that you can try out that are work in progress and that sort of stuff. It's good times. But we had our first build of that after a week, and so because we were like, look, as much as we like games, as much as we want to make the game that we want to play, we want to know what players want to play. So we've done that. Yeah, taking it out and having hundreds of people play the game makes a big difference. And as early and as often as possible, getting it in players' hands over the course of development. And that was part of why we went to PAX as well. Like that's a incredibly concentrated way to get some amazing players come through and give you some feedback on what they think. So yeah, in terms of the process though, you start with a one-liner, and then a huge amount of brainstorming, and then cut it all the way back to, okay, what do we think we can realistically make? And then cut it back again because you're overestimating it. Then it's okay, out of the stuff which you think is realistic as the whole game, what's your kind of minimum prototype for your game loop? And that was that week of development thing. That's okay, what's the game loop? Let's make it. Let's get it in the hands of players. And then it's rearranging your to-do list for a very long time until you get to release, basically.
Yeah. So it's funny, I was waiting for you to say minimum viable product. I was like, yes, here we go. We're in software product management. Let's get it. So I'm glad you called it a prototype in the loop. And for people that don't understand kind of like agile development and lean methodology, which I'm assuming is what you're kind of working
I'm
towards.
very, very au fait, yeah.
Yeah. So the whole concept is you get your most minimal core concept, and then you iterate off of that. You want to fail fast
Yeah,
and keep going, right? Um,
absolutely.
so that's just kind of like Ross and I are like, yes, we get what you're saying, but for people that might not be as kind of wrapped into that world, I have a question, and I noticed this. Is the game you were alluding to Rampage Arena, perchance?
Yes, yeah, yeah. So that,
Okay.
that was the one that we had parked. So we spent about a year on that, and it was the same thing. We had the New Zealand Game Developers Association was like, oh, we'd love some more games for our next booth, and at the time the next convention was like 6 weeks away, and kind of Ian and I looked at each other and went, yeah, we could do something in 6 weeks. And this is part time, so it effectively adds up to about a week of development. And yeah, we put it together based on another game prototype that we'd made a few years ago, but we wanted to make it bigger and multiplayer and a bunch of other stuff. And yeah, it was really well received. And I think a lot of people had a lot of fun with it. And I would still like to kind of revisit that, but it's too big right now. And I think we'd either have to slim it down so that it was manageable, which I think might kind of just kill it in terms of the audience, or yeah, wait until we can scale up.
Yeah.
Essentially.
When I was doing some research and stuff, back when I did the preview on Starport Delta, and then before at the review of Starport Delta, I like went in, I watched that game, and when you said we had another game, I was like, I had to go to your website. I was like, there was this cool game, and it looked like it was like Rollerball meets like Rocket League. I was like,
Yeah.
that's got to be the one that was too big, because it looked super fun, but I could see like that's just like it's gonna
Yeah,
take a team.
it was hilarious because as I said, it was based on an earlier game, which was a single player one, which is think kind of really early GTA where you kind of had the ball rolling around the city and you'd smash into things and roll over people and they'd kind of explode in puffs of smoke or whatever. And yeah, and the prototype that we made for that was a lot of fun, but there was all kinds of other problems with it, so it kind of got shelved. And we're like, oh, we can revisit this because it's still a lot of fun. And Rocket League was starting to really take off. And the funniest thing I think talking to people about Rocket League is they're like, at the end of the day, Rocket League is soccer, like, but nobody really plays it because they like soccer.
Hmm.
They play it because they like the cars and the smashing things around and all this sort of stuff. And it's we were looking at that and like, let's just remove uh the soccer thing and just make it people smashing into each other with these balls. And it was so funny because we had all these ideas around, oh, we were going to make it like a literal post-apocalyptic arena with little prisoners running. I don't know if you saw was it the movie Gamer or something, and
Yeah.
they had the prisoners running around in the arena or whatever, and
Mhm.
we were thinking of having this, and you'd roll over the prisoners and go whatever. And so we were thinking like a much more mature audience to start with, and interestingly we didn't have time. We didn't have time to add any of that in to that first prototype that we took to Armageddon, and so it was just the small arena and the ball smashing into each other and what have you. And the funniest thing about that experience is that the median age of our players was probably 10. We went into this expecting that we were making a kind of post high school, almost R18 kind of end of the spectrum. And yeah, probably the median age was 10. We had kids as young as I think 4 or 5 playing the game. And because it was multiplayer and because it's a convention, you get family come along and listening to the mum going, "Go Timmy, smash daddy," is just hilarious. But it also meant that Ian and I sat there and went, we may need to pivot our thinking a little bit here and go, okay, why is this attractive to parents and to kids? And they pick up the controller and it takes them all of 4 seconds to learn how to play. And that had a real advantage, I think. And I think that taught me personally a lot about uh, explaining things at a convention is very different. And getting people to learn how to play a game at a convention is very different from sitting down in your own home and learning how to play a game. And it actually made Starport Delta kind of an interesting case because it's a horrible game to have at a convention. Uh, and I think this is probably true of any strategy game, but anything when you have to learn a lot, or you have to understand some complex chain of dependencies or mechanics in order to really delve into how it works. You're not going to pick it up for 5 minutes, understand it, play it, move on. And a lot of conventions, that's what you're after. You're after that quick experience. And whereas for Starport and definitely a lot of other strategy titles as well, it's or simulation type stuff as well. You've got to be there for half an hour to really understand what you're looking at.
Yeah.
So it was really funny that we picked this game and we were like, oh, this is actually really horrible for a convention because it's not convention friendly at all.
It's like a speed dating experience. You're trying to get the meaningful relationship.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that made it really really challenging. We had to get our explanations and stuff very very fast.
So
Makes
that
sense.
kind of goes into another thing that I was going to ask you is you have Starport Delta
Mhm.
launched, you have your ideas that you want to work on, but then you
Sure.
also have these other prototypes that are just sort of sitting around and you're
Mhm.
kind of like, oh, maybe these would be good someday. At what point does working on Starport Delta sort of get, I don't want to say in the way, but when does it become, since you're only 2 people, you're doing this part time, when does this become, I really want to do this, but we have to work on this content that we're doing for this, or we have to fix this bug that we've been working on for like a week, and
Yeah.
you have all this other stuff, and like at what point do you just kind of say, we've committed so much into this right now, let's shift into this next thing that we want to work on. How do you
Yeah.
prioritize that is kind of what I'm sort of asking.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Don't know. We're still in the throes of working that out. There's a degree of, I mean, we've got a lot of different projects and things that we want to look at, and um, definitely we've got a few specific ideas that we've kind of narrowed down for what's coming next, and uh, it's hard. I think that Starport, originally the idea was that we'd be able to step away from this being as part time as it is. So whether that's just still part time, but more hours that we're able to put into it, as long as there was enough money to kind of fund us working on it. So the idea was that we wouldn't have to split our attention as much with an incredibly limited time resource. Um, so we're still trying to work out what that means right now, and we're still, doing updates and balancing and listening to what people are saying. I've added another couple of languages already. There's yeah, it's going to be tricky. I think we'll probably it'll have kind of ebbs and flows. We've put out, I think, I don't even know, like a lot of updates since launch. But there's we'll probably have to just slow that down, I think, and say, right, we'll need to, if we're going to start the next thing, or start, even if the next thing is a DLC or a big content update for Starport later on that we're wanting to, add at a really specific time or whatever it is, we'll need to, yeah, I think we'll need to split it so that we've got, okay, fix bugs first, make sure that you've got things working for people, because that gets really annoying. Um, some stuff is going to be hard because things like upgrading the engine version is really hard, because you've got plugins and changes that you don't anticipate breaking things, and right now that's a particularly irritating one for me, because there's some stuff which is really broken in the version of the engine we're using, and it will be fixed as soon as we upgrade, but it's like saying, okay, I have a flat tire, I'm going to replace my car, you know, and even though you need to do it, it's a lot of work to replace the car instead of just a flat tire. So yeah, I don't know is the ultimate answer to that. I think that it is a balancing game, and we're going to have to say, look, we're going to spend this much time on this, and uh, you know, try and allocate what we can to the next thing. And part of that will also be looking at other kinds of funding. If we can get some funding from something for the next project, so it's sending out applications, or once we've got a prototype, people like prototypes because they can play it.
Mhm.
Once we've got something people can play and look at and go, oh, that's some pretty art and a good idea. Let's see where they can go with it. That'll be a bit different, I think, because then we'll be able to say, right, we've got this funding that'll pay for our time to do this next project, and then we can keep just doing the Starport updates and stuff on the side, and that'll be less of a deal, I think.
Makes sense. I have two questions. One's quick, one's longer. I just want to do a time check and make sure you're still good to keep going
I'm
for a
good.
little bit longer. Okay.
I'm good.
And then the second question is, it's partially a statement and then it's a question. So the statement is, I commend you guys. I've never seen a game. Ross and I have this thing, right? The developers, we hear you, right? And they never do, right? But you guys have done every review you guys respond to on Steam. In the Discord, if someone brings something up, I'm in the Discord. You guys, mention either didn't see that, thanks for bringing it up, or I'm already working on it. And you guys have put out like just a disgusting amount of patches to stuff. Like I don't know, like you said, I don't know what version you're on. It might be like 1.80 at this point. Um, it's
Not quite
insane.
that much, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
So from that perspective, post launch, the game comes out. Let's ignore critical acclaim or declaim. I don't know what the appropriate word would be. Like, who cares what the critics think? The player base
Yeah.
is there. They start playing. You start getting feedback. Was it always a plan? It sounds like it was, but was it always a plan to prioritize that and just like keep chunking away at issues and improvements to the game? Or was that something that you guys on the fly saw? Okay, there's a few bugs we missed. There's some quality
Oh
of
no,
life things. Like,
no, absolutely. I mean, like I said about the process for development has been very player centric. It's it's always been get it in players' hands as often as we can and see what they think. And during development, we didn't really have anything that came out of left field and said, "Oh, that we totally should add that in." We didn't think of that at all. As I said, like the first thing we do is have this massive brainstorm session. So really, during development, it was always about essentially reshuffling the to-do list. So you go to and we did this sometimes, excuse me, between days of conventions as well. On the first day, if you get 10 people telling you the same thing, you're like, okay, let's see if we can do something about that. And sometimes if it was something really small, we could do it overnight or do it at the hotel or wherever it was. And the next day at the convention, we'd get completely different feedback. And it was absolutely always the intention that at launch we would be monitoring as much as we could and putting in as much as we could, because we knew that it didn't matter how many people we had in the alpha or the beta. Once it goes out into the market, you're always going to get different hardware, different personalities, different things that are going to come back that you can't get when you have a kind of self-selecting group of people at a convention or from a mailing list or what have you. So we always knew there was going to be all kinds of stuff coming back at us that we would not encounter. So we wanted to be as on top of it as possible.
I've gained so much sympathy for you and developers when I went through and read the forums, and this guy is asking how he's asking you guys to fix something for this weird resolution that I probably was like an 80-inch TV, and he's like, the menu element here, the text kind of overrides when I'm playing this on my 80-inch screen TV, and it's just like, who thinks of these things when you're developing the game?
Well, yeah, you don't, is the short answer. And it's been interesting because we've also had a few compliments from people going, "Oh, I'm really glad it supports extra wide monitors and stuff." Because like a lot of people are like, "Hey, it's 2020. Come on, why do games not support extra wide monitors?" And we're like, "Well, yeah, okay, yeah, it does." But the odd ones, where it's something incredibly massive like your big TV, or somebody who's got like a really really small screen. And I'm just like, why are you playing this on a really small screen? Because we'd always looked at it and be like, okay, your standard kind of, whatever it is, monitor. And while we'd accounted for some stuff, we didn't kind of go through like 100 different resolutions of things to try and account for it. And I think that that's something that a bigger team has a better advantage for, because they do have the time to be able to say, right, let's set up a massive number of devices or have a test on all these different resolutions or whatever it is, and have somebody that's their job, to test all these different kind of edge cases. But yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff where we look at it and we're just like, no, we did not think of that people would play in that particular format. And yeah, we'd love to be able to say that it's a quick fix for some of those things, but it's not. Some of those things are, some of them are, but a lot of them aren't. And I think that if we can accommodate them, we will. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff where it's okay. Do we effectively rewrite the entire UI to accommodate an 80-inch TV not having the right size text box on something? And that same level of effort being put into new content or into a new game is a really hard opportunity to kind of balance off, because we obviously want as many of our players to experience it and be happy with it as they can. And that's it's why we support as many languages as we do. It's why we are onto it as much as we can be. But yeah, there are definitely some edge cases where we're like, I would have to rewrite the game for this, and that probably won't happen. It's something that we can take on board for the next game, and I think that's been a big learning for us, is that we can say, oh well, people will play this on an 80-inch TV or a tiny 4:3 aspect ratio monitor, and we can look at that and go, okay, right, people are going to do this. Let's try and design with that in mind for the next thing.
Yeah.
And there's a limit to that,
Yeah.
there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
You're gonna
uh,
homebrew a Nintendo Switch and try and Steam Link it on there, see if everything looks good.
yeah, there's a bit of that, and I think that anytime you talk about a Switch or another device, whatever, you almost need to say, right, let's redesign the UI. Like some of them, like you just can't, like you just can't. You have to take a whole different type of interaction and understand that the player base is different as well. People that play on a Switch play on a Switch differently than on a PC, and you have to make allowances for that.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that, and so my Gamezo's not my only job. I'm also a crime fighter at night, but my day job is information security, and I
Mm,
deal with tons of companies where it's that edge case, and they're like, "Well, no, why can't you just do this one thing?" And you have to explain that this platform that hundreds of large companies use, in our instance, was just not architected to do that. And unless
yeah,
you want us to break down a product that's been around for a decade and rebuild it, we can't. Sorry, we can't do that. And it's going to be, I think, even for you guys, if you had a team of 20, it's not as easy as throwing on, junior developer Ross to go fix
yeah.
that issue. A lot of the time, sometimes it's just sorry, it's not
Like a
built that
junior
way. It can't.
developer.
Yeah.
It's just you can't do that. So
Yeah.
um, that's interesting. I had a question. This is more of a like how does it feel question, but like okay, so you
Mhm.
mentioned really early on everything's driving towards this launch day, right?
Mm.
All week at launch day, launch week, we gotta nail that. We talked a little bit about taking feedback and running with it and whatnot. What does it feel like the night before your game launches? Like what is that? Do you sleep? Do you like what do you
Not
do?
really. Yeah. So we launched. I think it was 3 p.m. New Zealand time. So that let us kind of be up and around and respond. And developers, broadly speaking, keep kind of odd hours anyway.
Mhm.
So that let us kind of stay up and do things and respond as quickly as we could. Um, so yeah, in the lead up to launch though, because it was in the middle of the afternoon. It's not like I'm launching at 9 p.m. on a Friday for us or anything. The It made it a bit easier because we could be around, and it was the middle of a day. Um, but how does it feel? Nervous? Probably crapping myself over the amount of stuff that I knew wasn't done. We were making builds and adding stuff in, right up into the lead up, and that was incredibly frustrating. There was a lot of stuff that I thought would be done, and it sounds dumb, but like I look back and I'm like, it really we needed a week. Like, and it's such a small amount of time, but like if we had another week, I think there was a bunch of little things that just would have been finished. And but we'd made a big song and dance about the deadline. We'd already pushed it out from last year, and uh, it's so funny. Like this in the Steam back end, with like they have all these warnings: don't adjust your deadline if unless it's actually necessary, and because they've had a lot of abuse in the
Mhm.
system of people kind of constantly pushing out the deadline so they stay on the up and coming list or whatever. Um, so they got to the point where they were like, nah. If you do this, like we're gonna penalize you for this if you keep doing this, and we're like, we don't really want Valve to be angry with us because we will just vanish.
Yes.
So we'd said we had a deadline and we wanted to make sure we met it, and I think for us that really just gave us impetus to all those little things. I say all. There was a few little things like some of the translations weren't finished,
Mhm.
and we had them finished the next day. But it's like you get a lot of players come in and like, why are the translations not finished? And it's just like, well, we're working as fast as we can with our translators, and it'll be in 24 hours.
Yeah.
Uh, and but it doesn't matter, like there's some players it's not good enough.
Yeah.
That
Um,
game is already refunded at that point.
Yeah.
There's already
well,
the negative review there. You're just like,
yeah,
well, we have it now. Come back.
yeah,
And I
as
even
it,
saw that in some of the reviews. Like you had responded, and then there was a particular instance where someone responded like 10 hours later, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, I refunded this already. Don't worry about it."
Yeah, and that's incredibly frustrating. And the stupid thing is, like I look at that and I'm just like, hey, I will give you a free copy of this game. I honestly, I would just be like, look, anybody that comes in and wants it in a different language, I'd be like, I will give you a free copy of this game because I want the feedback on the language. Like it's really hard, when you're translating a game, and as much as you put into quality control around, okay, well, you work with translators and QA people or what have you, and you're like, hey, this is as good as gonna get it, but hey, I don't speak Spanish.
Mhm.
I don't speak Russian. I can't even recognize the characters in Russian. Spanish, at least, I kind of go, that looks like an E.
Mhm.
But the it makes a really big difference, I think, to me to have a player who plays the game whose English is not great or non-existent, who then reviews the game in their language, and it's amazing Google translating some of this stuff and going, hey, I'm really glad it was in XYZ language, and we want the feedback. We want people to say, hey, you missed a full stop here, or hey, in Chinese, this box isn't big enough. Can you make it bigger? There's only so much that we can do, and particularly when we don't speak any of these languages, um, it's very hard to get realistic feedback from players. So that instance where you're like, oh no, I've already refunded it. Don't worry about it. I'm just like, well, we had the translations in like, yeah, it was within like 8 hours or something of seeing that, and I literally would have gone back and said, look, have the game for free. Just tell me what you think of the translations now that they're in. And there's been a bunch of cases where like we would have loved to have done that, but the response has been either non-existent or very actively hostile, and that's kind of tricky to deal with when you're trying to make it as accessible as you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
You guys are big
funny.
in Korea, apparently.
Beg your pardon?
You guys are big in Korea, apparently.
Yeah, so we still don't have Korean, um, but we've got a few votes from people on the discussion forums, and yeah, I think that one's next on my list of I need to find a translator. Um, but yeah, it costs money, and it takes time to get someone into it. So if I can swing it, I will. Like, I would love to get Starport in pretty much as many languages as I can manage. And I think we had one person who did a preview of it, which was kind of surprised. I think we launched with 8 languages, and they were like, "Well, this is weird. Why is there an indie game with 8 languages on it?" Um, and in retrospect, it's kind of one of those ones that maybe we would have been better off launching only in English and adding languages later. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that is different, and what I wanted to ask off of that is like, what is it like using a third party, like contracting out such a core component? Like you're not contracting out like you have control of a lot of stuff. I don't want to make it sound like you guys for our listeners, you didn't like contract out the game. You contracted out the translation component, right? Like what is it like relying for something so important to you guys as part of the game, relying on this third party that you don't have control over?
Um, it's different, I guess, and it's different, I think, from some other stuff. You talk about people who you contract to do some art for you or music or whatever it is, and when it's something that you can understand and critique the result of, I think is very different. If somebody gives you a piece of music and you're like, I like this, I don't like this, can you please change this, whatever it is. But when it's something you've written and it's a translation, you rely on them to translate what you've done in a way that's going to make sense for your audience in that language. And it's hard because you can't critique it,
Mhm.
and wherever possible, I've tried to have proofreaders or people an extra person in each language as much as I can, just to catch stuff like that. And that's been a big recommendation that a lot of other developers have said to me, is even if your translator is amazing, uh, try and get a proofreader, because sometimes there's just stuff that they'll just miss, or it'll be an idiom that they've never heard of, that there's an equivalent in their language, but they don't necessarily think that that's what it is. And it's been really interesting going through and finding all the idioms and pop culture references and stuff, and being like, right, this is, I just didn't even think of that as a thing. One of the most hilarious ones for that was what was it? So one of the names of the mission is teaching an old dog new tricks, and or new tricks for an old dog or something. It's that idiom that and this doesn't translate very well to a lot of languages, but oh no, that's what it was. Herding cats. So
Oh, okay.
the expression herding cats, right? To means to do something incredibly hard. Like it's almost impossible to do this. And in Polish, the equivalent expression is taking a hoe to the sun.
That's awesome.
And I just thought this was amazing. I was just like, that is a fantastic idiom that we should totally adopt in English. But going to try and farm the sun as the equivalent, and I was just like, that's so great. I think that for me encapsulates the difference between translation and localization. Like you could literally just translate you're herding cats, or you can localize and say, right, our equivalent idiom is this. And talking with the translators, and I think this is where I get the reassurance from them, where they do talk to me and say, hey, this is what I've done. It's not literal. It's more our own idiom and all that sort of stuff. I think gave me more reassurance when I was talking to them that what they were doing was, localizing it for the audience in a way that I just never would be able to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, but on the whole though, I think it's nervous because you can't see it. You can't, do not try and use Google Translate or any machine translation on anything, like, because some languages is okay. You get kind of an idea, but other languages are horrible.
Yeah.
Like, so even if I wanted to use Google as a kind of safety check, it just wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah. I think
So
about we have in the business I work in, we have a Japanese office and they deal with APAC. And sometimes they'll send my team questionnaires, and all of them will be translated and localized except like one. And so we'll have to like Google Translate it, and it's like something cheeseburger, ICMP, and we're like, what? Like this doesn't make any
yeah,
sense. And that's all I could think of was like you mentioned, you're
yeah,
using this third party for this big important thing, and like in the middle of a sentence they could be like cheeseburger, hot dog, and like you'd have no idea.
absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, having proofreaders where you can, I think helps. And other than that, it's just you just got to have faith and say these people are going to do a good job, and hopefully the players will come back when you launch and say, hey, this I really enjoyed it in this language or whatever it is. So it was really funny. I had this great review from someone that was like, this game is great, that really detailed about what they liked and what they didn't like, and it was all in Chinese. And I had to Google Translate it to try and work out what the hell they were saying. And literally the only thing that was in English was, this needs a Chinese localization. And and
Okay.
but it was this fantastic review, like, where they actually they went into detail and had like, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, and overall they liked the game. And I just had to laugh because I was like, I'd already had the Chinese translation kind of in the works, and I knew it was coming, and I was like, okay, we're gonna have this coming soon or what have you, and I didn't want to. And yeah, so I ended up being able to go back to them and say, yep, we've got Chinese, both simplified and traditional now, both in the game. And it's really fascinating, I think, when you get players who have enough English to review it, because the core mechanics and stuff, you don't need much language at all, really. But if you want to play through the campaign with the story and all the rest of it, or understand some of the warnings or messages or what have you, then yeah, sure. But yeah, it's definitely, this is quite a contrast to, I read a review. I Google translated a review that was in Korean, and I'll tell you right now, Korean is one of those languages that Google Translate does not like, or it just, for whatever reason, you get like one word in five in terms of it making any kind of sense out of the machine translated version. And but it was the same thing. It was like this, don't like this, and eventually, why is this not in Korean? And it's kind of funny, like I want to get it in as many languages as I can, but yeah, it's about finding the right people and making sure I trust them to do a good job. And yeah, it's definitely different, but fundamentally though, I think it's just, yeah, talking to your translators and having faith that what they're doing is representing what you want.
Yeah, no buying the Fiverr basic package from some guy that's doing translations for $5, right?
No, no, not so much. And yeah, it's funny. I had our Russian translator was really interesting when he was first pitching to me about translating the game, and he said he'd done his research and he'd found some other New Zealand developers or something that had got translations into Russian for their games, and he was like, "Look, I don't care if you use me or not, but don't do what these guys did, because all they did was machine translate their blurb on the store into Russian, and he gave me the equivalent, like what it sounds like to a Russian person, and I was just like, oh god,
Awesome.
oh no." But the flip side for me was that I that gave me kind of a weird reassurance that he was taking it seriously and was looking at it and saying, "Look, even if you don't use me, don't do this." And it made a big difference around how I felt about how seriously he took it. It's like he wanted to make sure that it was right for a Russian audience, and that was really interesting to me as an experience when I was just starting to talk to translators. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Ross, do you have we're coming up, we've almost done an hour and a half. This is
Yeah.
this is awesome. So
I was
I
I was about to say, are you I mean,
I'm
I'm
good.
sure we're pretty much all wrapped up for the most part. I mean, Dan, you probably have like one question. I have like one kind of basic question. It's more about you sort of as a person.
Sure.
You're working full time, working on this game part time. Personally, I have days where I finish my 8-hour workday and I can't put a bagel in a toaster. So it's like, what kind of drives you and what motivates you to just get home and I'm gonna crank out this game for another 5-6 hours or whatever, as opposed to, man, I'm really just gonna sit on the couch and eat bagel bites for like a little bit.
I love that I've lived in the US and I know what bagel bites are.
It's the only
Um,
reason I said it.
yeah, the that's a tricky one. I tend to divide the week up so that I can dedicate more of a day where I can. So rather than do a work day, then do another work day, um, it becomes a right. Today is game day, or these 2 days a week are game days, and my work affords me a degree of flexibility there that I can do that, at least to a certain degree. So I can take a half day on a Friday, and then spend the rest of it and do like a full day on games, or that sort of thing. So uh, motivation wise, I think it's just it's you want to create something, and I've talked a little bit about this with a few other developers. Games are fundamentally about telling a story or creating something, communicating with your players, and this is true whether you're making Final Fantasy or Candy Crush. It's a way of saying, right, the people that made this are trying to connect with you in some way. They're trying to tell you something, and even if what they want to tell you is, I'm going to blow you up with a peach bomb, they're trying to tell you something. It's a drive to communicate. It's a drive to create, and I think that even on days where I've put in a long day doing my regular work, and I come to the end of it and I'm like, you know what? No, I want to keep going. Like there's don't get me wrong. There's other days where you're like, no, all I want to do is sleep. Uh, and I got 2 kids, so sleep is for the weak. Uh, but there's a yeah, it's just, I don't know how to explain it other than it's just you you want to do something. You want to create this thing, and uh, you know, there are so many developers that I look at who have been making the same product for 5, 6, 7 years. You know, and it's the greatest games never released. You know, and some of them are amazing, and I think that those games, when they do release them, you can really feel what they've put into them. You know, you can feel that they have spent this time crafting it and creating it, and how they convey their passion for the project uh, to their players. You know, and I think probably one of the biggest examples of that in history for the indie scene was probably Phil Fish, right? Like you look at Fizz, and it was this game which kept winning awards and awards, and hadn't been released yet. You know, and it was years later, and that still hadn't released after it's like best game of 5 years ago. It still hasn't been released, you know, or whatever it was. And but he stuck to it, and he kept going, and had this amazing passion for it, and got it out the door, and everybody loved it, you know. And it was one of those things that I think you can really, regardless of anything else after the fact, like you sit down and you play that game, you can feel how much he wanted to create it. And I think most indie developers are like that. They sit down and they want to create, they want to do something, uh, and it, as much as, you know, we're all there to try and uh, you know, quit our day jobs and make money making games. You know, and I say all,
Look at us.
not everybody does, but uh, you know, I wouldn't be doing what I do as my day job if I didn't like it at this point. Like I still do. But I like making games probably a bit more. And if I can transition to doing that more, great. And I think that that helps. I think it's about motivating you into doing things that you want to do. And games is one of those things. You know, I have never encountered another discipline that combines as much creative talent. And for any game, you have to have people who are amazingly creative at programming, at art, at sound, you know, UI, even all the marketing stuff as well. I mean, I suck at marketing, but you know, I can appreciate how much work and creativity goes into it. You know, and but even if you set aside the selling of it, even just the core product, you know, like there's so many different disciplines that have to come together, and whether that's done by one person or 100 people, you know, there's a lot of different elements. And you know, film kind of comes close, with a lot of different stuff that goes into it, but the interactive element to it that you have to take into account, and what that means for game design, uh, there's so many creative disciplines that have to come together to get something out the door. And all of those creative minds and people, I think, is really what drives any of those projects. You talk about you know, who's the person who goes and does their regular day job and comes home and paints or writes music. You know, it's the same thing. They do it because they have a drive to create. And I think game developers are the same. You know, it's a lot of people don't look at games as much as a creative endeavor. They kind of look at it as, you know, it's you just sit around playing games all day. Um, but it is, you know, like every single element of this has some creative drive, some creative aspect to it that has to be taken into account to make a game. And I think that's one of the biggest things that really attracts me to game development.
Yeah, I think you nailed a few things there that well, I don't want to say nailed because it's, you know, but you validated my opinions on some things, right? Which
Yeah,
I tell people all the time. I'm like, look, you either want to do it or you don't, right? Either you have the drive to do it because it's important to you, or you don't do it. And then the other thing that you hit that I laugh at, right, which is you like your day job, but you kind of like making games more. I always discuss like there's 3 jobs in the world I'd be happy to be doing. You know, I'm doing one of them. There's
yeah,
maybe one I would rather do, and one I would rather be doing what I'm doing now. And I think that's an important thing for people to understand, is that, like, you know, if you're in a comfortable spot, don't rush. Just understand that that's your next. Like, you would rather be doing that and work towards it. Um,
Yeah.
but kind of Ross said, like, teed it up right with this question, because you put a lot in there. But I guess the last question that we'll hit you with, and you've been gracious with your time, and we appreciate it, for sure, because we had like 20 minutes
Okay.
of us discussing beforehand, and you've done an hour and a half worth of podcast here. But if you had someone come up to you and say, we'll do it. I'm trying to make my first indie game right now. If you had one piece of advice for me, right, you can see you can see the C# and the Unity programming books in the background. Did I set those
This
up
is
for
the
this?
main reason you're here.
Yeah.
This is the main reason why you're here in this interview, by the way, because he wanted to ask you this stuff.
I need the information I'm picking, okay? Like, but I have other friends and people that I know that they're always like, oh, if I could just make the game. But it's like, what is the one piece of advice? And I think you've given, through some of the other questions, a ton of really good advice for anybody who would want to get into making games. But if you had like your like golden piece of advice for someone trying to make their own game, what is that?
It's hard, right? Like, I don't know if there's any one thing. I think for me personally, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give is find someone else. Uh, you know, we see this all the time. Like, I help run the local game dev meetup here in Christchurch, and one of the things we do is we have game jams, and we have people that come along and do guest speaking and that sort of stuff. And I think for me, as much as have a lot of respect for the solo developer that kind of does their passion project, I know that I would not have been able to make Starport by myself as it is. And I don't just mean that from a creative talent standpoint. Don't get me wrong. Like, I can try and hire people to do things that I don't have the ability to do. But I think fundamentally having a team of two, or three or five or whatever it is, but finding someone else has benefits you cannot predict, because you can bounce ideas off of each other and come up with something that neither of you would have come up with individually. You can ask them, hey, have you encountered this problem before? And maybe they have, maybe they haven't, but you can work through it. The designs and the critiques, and we've gone through things on the game where we Ian's made a fantastic looking building, and I look at it and I'm just like, it looks good, but it's not what we need. And then we have a discussion and we come through the other side and he does another one and it looks amazing. And I know that if he'd been doing it himself, he wouldn't have done that. He would have iterated himself, but he wouldn't have got to the same point. When we're talking about things like the music, he's an amazing composer. Ian done some great music for the game, and we've had a lot of compliments on the music. And it's been I'm musical enough to be able to critique intelligently, and that's helped drive stuff for that. And he's got absolutely enough programming chops to be able to say, hey, why don't we do this or that for the technical side of things. And there's some of that stuff which is just totally unpredictable, and you see it in game jams all the time. A team of 3 or 4 people that get thrown together for a weekend, and they're like, okay, what's everybody doing? And it doesn't matter what engine, doesn't matter what language, having somebody else that you can bounce off of is amazing. And even if you do want to do everything yourself, that finding someone else is a mentor. It's another developer who's in the same boat that's making a different product. It's being able to find someone that you can talk to, whether that's a collaborator, to really get that kind of synergistic approach to making something, or it's someone else that you kind of view of as a compatriot. It's yeah, having someone else, having that community of people to talk to about it, and that team of people, I think, to really work on something together is probably the best. I wouldn't be able to make the same kind of games by myself, and even if I was making it by myself, I would be racing after as many people in our community as I could to get advice or to try and collaborate on parts of whatever it is, and yeah, I'm very big on getting involved with other people because, as I said before, like games take a huge variety of creative talents, and even if you are one of those amazing people that has all of those talents in one body, uh, I still firmly believe that you're not going to make as good a product, as good a game that can reach as many people uh, as the people that take those talents and combine them with the talents of other people.
Awesome. I think that is excellent advice. I mean, you're the expert, not me, but it sounds like really good advice. So,
Yeah, despite the fact that Starport's an Unreal, you let me know if you've got some problems with C#. I can help you out there.
awesome. I appreciate that. I did Java in college and I use Python in my daily life. It hasn't
Yeah,
been too difficult, but yeah, we'll see. But now I got a resource.
I
See,
pre-
Ross, this whole podcast, this whole ruse, this this was a facade to get help. But awesome. We really appreciate the time. I think this is. I
no
hope
worries.
people listen to this because there's
This is
like
great.
tons of like just golden information in there that I think people just don't understand like what it takes to make a game, right? And I think
A
from
lot.
yeah, exactly. Like from the ups to the downs to the things you don't think about. I think you helped lay it all out, and you were very honest, and we appreciate that. Plug all your stuff, your socials, where people can buy the game. Like,
Gonna make
Yeah, I mean, starportdelta.com is the website. It's Starport Delta on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. It's pretty much where we're at. Cloudfire Studios is our little two-man team. Yeah, we're all over the show as well. We're very Googleable,
Yeah.
so I don't think you need to try too hard to find us. I think.
all right,
This
Google
is
them
gonna
up.
sound weird, but can you plug someone else that you feel is worthy of plugging? Like maybe some like a colleague that you're working with that has something cool coming up or anything that we should be paying attention to.
Oh, what's
You're gonna get him
something?
in trouble. There's like
I
30
know,
people
right?
probably hoping they get this plug right
Ugh.
now.
um, oh, that's tough. I mean, most of the people that I'm working with haven't released their stuff yet.
Don't break any NDAs.
Yeah. So I may reserve that for
Okay.
something later. But yeah, there's a lot of. I think probably what I will do is plug the NZGDA, so the New Zealand Game Developers Association. Um, New Zealand as a country, I mean, we were talking a little bit before the podcast about us as a filming location and what that's done for our industry here. But I think the games that are being developed in New Zealand are amazing. And going to the NZGDA's website, nzgda.com, going to their website and looking at all the studios, all the developers, and the various games and things that they have in either out or in the works or whatever. Like there's some amazingly talented people here, and from a game development standpoint, it's a country to keep an eye on.
That's awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
So now I'll do all the plugs for us. So you've got
Yeah.
I'm Bitwise Dan. You can if you're already here or listening, you know, just follow me. Ross is Rain, our success. Gamezo is Gamezo GG on Twitter, and gamezo.co.uk is the website where you can read all the stuff. We're wherever podcasts are. So if you're watching and you want to go back and listen to some gems, some nice little pieces of wisdom and information, you can find us anywhere. And other than that, we're back next Sunday ish,
Yeah.
and we'll do more stuff. So we appreciate the time. I hope that people continue to give you guys feedback. I hope you continue to build the game. As I mentioned, go look at the review that I did. And speaking of
Mm.
reviews, you too can review this podcast, give it 5
Oh, there it
stars,
is. Don't do
like,
that.
follow, do all that stuff. So I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.